actually found that we were both scheduling a meeting the same night. I explained to Ty, gee, we're trying to remain neutral on most other issues than getting the city started up. And we figured out we could just do back-to-back meetings. And so it worked out very well. Good omens for how the city can work together going forward. I'm Kay Hoagland. You may be very tired of me wearing green and getting PowerPoints, because I've done a few. But this meeting actually had its roots in folks from District 5, the new District 5 for the city. Mike Hillstrom, and where's Don? Don thought up the idea, what if we have district-focused meetings just to talk about what it takes to run? And so thanks to you two people for raising this great idea. It's more Don, so thank you very much. That's okay, because Mike is the brunt of most of the jokes I've tried to work into the presentation, so it's okay. And in what those of us who are volunteering to help provide the infrastructure setting of the city, thought it was a really good idea. So we're actually replicating this for the remaining 3 districts on Monday night. And thank you for that wonderful grassroots idea. Now, on to a very simple presentation. I do want to say at the outset, this is not to recruit. You know, we're not standing here trying to solicit and recruit. What we're trying to get you to do is to consider running yourself, or for you to talk to your neighbors, family, others whom you think you would like to see running for public office. Once again, we volunteers who are working to set up the city are really neutral on this. And what we want to do is provide the information that's helpful for people to run for office. And that's what I've got in a few short slides for you tonight. Tonight we go through just some very basics about what it takes to run in the upcoming elections in November. Then we're going to do some Q&As, have a very informal, open discussion. And then we're going to break out in districts where you can talk amongst yourselves and maybe, you know, develop some ideas of what are your issues, some ideas of who might be a good candidate. We're going to have a selected person in each district sit with the group and take down some names and have an independent person just contact that person and say, you know, someone thought you would be a good candidate, so we're passing that on. Michael's doing that for District 5, and we'll get someone maybe outside District 4 to do the same thing. Again, it's not recruiting, it's passing on information. And then in each of your groups, we can talk about follow-ups. Also, in terms of not recruiting, this is not the forum in which to say something like, say Mike and I were neighbors. You know, it's like, Mike, if you run, I won't run. And then we'll get no one else to run and you can be our guy. We don't want to do that brokering, that political brokering here at this meeting. This is about encouraging lots of people to run. It's not about getting people to drop out. So we'll talk about follow-ups in your group sessions. Critical dates, we've seen these before. Some of these have slightly changed, some of the details have slightly changed. First and foremost, the county is running the elections this year. And the grand news is, you know, we think highly of, most of the Valley thinks highly of the election process and the election office in Weber County. They are really professional. And so they are providing all the structure for us and the staffing, which is very good. The first hurdle here is there's a week-long, 5 days of when you can file to become a candidate. And again, showing the elections office is, you know, aware and sensitive to the needs of our residents. They're going to be open from 8 till 5 every day from June 2nd to June 6th, right here. to take in the registrations that people need to file for office, to answer questions, and to generally be working to support this entry into the election process. This was previously the library. Someone picked up a couple of days ago. Oh, it's changed. The elections office was so courteous and thoughtful, they realized the library where they were going to take these is not open until 10, so they wanted to give people that extra 2 hours right up here. It's just terrific. One thing I love about municipal politics and municipal elections in Utah, it's not partisan. And, you know, I think you may have gotten the feeling from the whole election vote last November, it wasn't partisan. We had people on all sides and parts of the spectrum, the political spectrum, expressing their views either in support or not in support of incorporation. You won't be charged to file. And if you're not going to be here, just call the election office at this number, because they can set up how you can file even though you're not here in person. Some people are going on vacation, and they raise that issue. Then, if we have primaries, they'll happen on August 12th. And all it takes to have a primary is 3 people putting in an application to run for the same seat. We could have a primary in all the districts. We could have a primary for the mayoral office. Maybe we have a primary for one district. But, you know, it's very interesting to realize, yeah, there may be enough interest that we're getting a primary. When we were working relative to the election, getting ready for the November election for incorporation, we kept getting the question, well, what if no one runs? I think you kept asking. And I don't think we're going to have that problem. On the volunteer list, which most or many of us put out, we put a question on there, would you like to get information about being a candidate? And we have at least 40 people who said yes. So there's at least that much interest in running for office, which is such a healthy sign for our upcoming elections. So we have the primary, there's the general, there's, yes?
So if it's nonpartisan, I'm not quite understanding the primary, other than you said 3 people or more running for one position.
Right.
So then is it to go to the general, the top 2 vote getters?
It will go to the top 2.
Okay.
So that's, yeah, that is will be narrowed down. The general, November 4th, and there is all the procedure of mail-in ballots, etc., that applies to elections statewide. There is also a period after that where the elections office will review, certify, make sure the election ballots were counted properly. And then they present it to the commissioners in what's called the canvass. And that occurs November 18th. So whomever we elect are not really officially there until November 18th, although it's rare, if ever, that a canvass comes up with a different result. You can see the ballot mailing. The swearing in occurs January 5th. And at that point, the elected officials can do a number of necessary steps before the city is officially incorporated. Turning the map to the county and state LG, Lieutenant Governor, getting a certificate of incorporation, so just dotting I's and crossing T's for that to happen. I want to point out this short time frame and why working on this transition is so critical and getting potential candidates to get engaged in the transitional work is so critical. There are, last time I counted, 21 business days between that canvass, November 18th, and the swearing-in day. That's because there are a lot of holidays at the end of November and through December. In that period of time, the electeds are allowed to do a great number of things, but suppressed. They are allowed to appoint a planning commission, which tells you, boy, is that an upfront important activity for city councils. They are allowed to enter into contracts, employment contracts, independent contractor contracts, and contracts for services. Intergovernmental contracts, for example, if we have, let's say, Weber County snow and roads, continue plowing our roads for some period of time. Those folks, even though they will not have been sworn in, have the legislative authority to authorize those. And then when they get sworn in, they ratify those contracts. It puts an immense amount of pressure on these candidates who are then elected to absorb this all in 3 weeks. And for that reason, that's why we are all 150 volunteers of us working to really make sure things are in place so they can go through and do all that signage, investigation, determinations they have to do in that brief period, and then start up the city effective January 5th. So we are, again, encouraging all people interested in running and holding office, get involved. You don't need to be doing all the work. You don't need to be preparing the draft budget for next year. We have people doing that. But you need to find out about it. You need to be open to hearing what that work is about. And it will only make it easier for you. Some of our prep work in this transition was talking to other towns and cities who have gone through this very same process. There is one city we talked to where the election was very close to incorporate, and actually some people who opposed incorporation were elected in the offices in the subsequent candidate election. They had done no preparation to start up the city. And they really had a difficult problem on their hands. They had no general plan for the area of the city. They didn't even have the right map for the city. So they were running in place for a long time, had to spend more money. Some of those candidates who were now elected put money in themselves to get some of the necessary work done. It was a hullabaloo. As opposed to another city that did things more planfully that we are trying to model ourselves after is Mill Creek. Much like us, some of the sponsors continue to work on the transition work. People who were interested in running got involved in the volunteer teams to understand what was going on. So I'm just saying, this work is going to be good work when it's completed. The electeds will have basically the owner's manual on how to start up the city. And the best recommendations we can come up with, the final decisions are going to be the electeds. So, what are the responsibilities and duties? You know, the code, the state code, has a lot of awkward language in it when it came to forms of government. Even some of these lawyers could not understand what was some of the distinction between the various 4 forms that are in the statute. So it took some explaining to do. And the form that is most common for cities of our size that are starting up, and the form that is most flexible for a new city that is just taking its first steps, unfortunately had a bad name. It was, it's the 6-person council with a weak mayor. And, we knew we had all received advice that was the preferred form for starting out. If it was not as contentious as having a strong mayor and a strong city council to butt heads. But this weak mayor, it was really not a fair name for it. Next time we'll talk to the legislature, I think about renaming it. What it is, I think it's six electeds who really need to work together and apportion responsibility to get the city operating well. One of whom will be the mayor. And in the election, there will be competition, there will be a race for mayor. That's an at-large position that encompasses the entire new city, and then there will be the 5 other council people. And I like to think of the mayor as the council person who is kind of the first among equals, in that he or she really represents and needs to take into account the interests of the entire valley. So are they weak? No, they have great persuasive authority and great leadership capacity in this position. It's up to them to use it wisely, and it's up to the council to make sure that they supervise that mayor's use of his or her authorities. And the way this actually breaks down is, think of the mayor as the chief executive officer. He or she will be the administrative head of the organization. If the city has employees, they will report to the mayor. They're responsible for making sure these laws are faithfully enforced. And I think this is a really powerful responsibility, to report to the council on the condition of the city and the needs of the city, which means they're leading the issue spotting, the identification of problem areas that the city really needs help with. This next responsibility is pretty powerful. They chair and preside at council meetings. In other words, they kind of have the first chance at controlling the agenda. So they set the tone of what the council is doing and working on. And of course, the council can suggest other topics, etc. They have some fun stuff, ceremonial. And unfortunately, sometimes the mayor in this format tends to be viewed as, oh, it's just a ribbon cutter. It's more than ribbon cutting, I assure you. They will also most likely be representing our city to the state legislature, to the county, to our congressmen and senators, with the interests of the city at heart. They don't vote. Well, you know, this is pretty awesomely powerful. And even though you don't get to vote, you do get to vote to break a tie. So, kind of like the Vice President of the United States gets to vote to break a tie in Congress. That's a pretty powerful responsibility. They can appoint or dismiss the municipal manager. This does take the concurrence of the city council. They can vote on the appointment or dismissal of the manager. And if mayor's powers are proposed to get changed, shrunk, expanded, they get to vote. So I think this says they vote on really important matters, but they also have a very broad scope of responsibility. The city council is best thought of as it's the legislative council for the organization, for the city. They decide the laws, prepare the laws, vote on the laws, pass ordinances and resolutions. They have the power of the purse, city budget.
Okay,
Yeah,
before you go on, can I ask a question?
sure.
Back on here, when the mayor does vote, since there's an odd number of council persons, the tiebreaker would be as if one were absent and they were even. So I
Right.
understand that. But then it says that it also appoints, votes when there's an appointment of the
Right.
manager. And the next point. So that means, though, that he could have cast a tying vote. Would that mean that his vote trumps the other because he's a tiebreaker?
I
See what I'm
think-
saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, without knowing the details. Or I would think tie means it doesn't pass.
Well, again, he's
At that
a
point.
tiebreaker.
And I don't think he'd get a double vote for his vote.
Well, if there were three voting one way, two voting the other, and he voted with the two, that's.
3-3, you need to be a
3-3.
tie, and I think tie means that proposal doesn't go through.
So he doesn't break the tie in that case.
There'd be a bit of loggerhead at that point.
Just clarify.
You were trying to trick me, Mike.
No, I
You didn't
wasn't.
tell me in advance you were
I
going
was
to ask this
just-
question. I'm kidding.
That's the
Um,
question.
No, the city council gets involved in appointments and advice. What I think is interesting, given the last presentation, They get involved in appointing city boards, commissions, which was mentioned in reference to a charter, departments, and they should help to really spell out the responsibilities of the mayor, the council, make sure there's a clear division of who's doing what, and also make sure that there are ordinances in place that describe that. Otherwise, it does get confused. It could result in people stepping on each other's toes. So clarity is important. Duties and responsibilities, flexibility in this form of government is key. And this is from the League of Cities and Towns Handbook on Duties and Responsibilities. And they're actually a broad group representing cities and towns, and are really experts on municipal governance. And they say, you know, how this form of government really happens is council members may be appointed to administrative positions heading departments and having day-to-day jobs in the city. So, what is very interesting from a startup point of view, we're not going to have 20 employees running this place. We're going to have all hands on deck, volunteers, city council, and mayor, to really figure out how to get this ship up and sailing. And so you may find council members, as well as the mayor, having operational roles. Let me see.
Sometimes there's a delay with the.
Okay. Oh! Or it advances very quick. Okay. So what does that mean? Fair warning. I got this picture of Mike Hillstrom from his wife. It was their last vacation. Vacation was spent at Pineview on one of the, no. And what I'm trying to tell you, this is not a board where you sit, you go twice a month, and you hear recommendations from staff and you vote. This is a roll up your sleeve kind of job, which I think is the opportunity of a lifetime to contribute to the founding of this city. It's going to be very exciting. One model that is suggested by that League of Cities and Towns quotation, and that actually is adopted in operation by many cities, they'll divide some of these operational categories and give one to each council member to oversee. And it's also likely that council member may be getting the phone calls if something's not working right. But they're going to be, especially initially, very hands-on in making sure the city responds to the constituents and is operating well. So those are some examples where they might have operational responsibilities. And let me see if we can get it going forward again.
It's the connection between the TV and the computer because it's wireless.
Because I'm almost done. Here we go. Okay. I love trucks in the valley. The old trucks are classic, but the same. The valley really needs you. It needs the neighbors you think may be good, family members who you think may be terrific at filling public offices here. Why would you want to take on this work? Again, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You get to shape the future of our city, really set the tone and culture. You get to speak for your district. You get to identify top local issues, like how do we protect ag and farmers in this valley? How do we promote our businesses here? You get to practice or develop your leadership skills. And I think you're just a great example for your family, for your community, of getting engaged and participating in public business here. So I think it's going to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help folks do that. So now let's talk. Say what?
I think you missed the slide.
I missed a slide.
Don't push it.
Oh. I can talk for another hour. No, I'm kidding.
No, I think there was one before the truck.
I am easy.
Yeah, there was.
Oh, there was that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. this is basically a little preview of how to run a campaign. Campaigns are going to be easier for these roles, especially for the council district roles, because it's a small number of voters. You know, in some places, you can go door to door and knock on every door of every voter, probably in a couple of weekends. Others, like the agricultural areas, you can find other ways to talk to people. Candidates have been known to ride their bikes to the doors of farmers, or you can have all kinds of sessions to sit down and chat. So, how do you run a campaign? Get some people to help you. It's hard to do all on your own. You have to budget. Budget's going to be not large for these roles. And by the way, running for office in the valley, as we have seen, is largely using yard signs. And, so you already know that's the standard pathway. Get an online presence, which is helpful. Voter data is often useful to know who are the voters in the district you want to represent. That's available at the county for a pretty cheap price, 0.002 cents per record. They're very accommodating in getting that. And it's always great to have legal guidance. We will try to provide that. There are certain campaign finance disclosures that you need to do. And occasionally some questions come up of a legal nature. You know, you can surface that and we will work to find an answer to help you as a candidate. Because we don't want anyone to run afoul of the law or just unintentionally make a mistake that disturbs their campaign. But, a lot of this is available on the Lieutenant Governor's site, and we direct you to those types of resources. So thank you for reminding me. We skipped that. I still like the old truck. And now we can talk. Go ahead.
I have a couple questions. First of all, we have 5 districts. I'm assuming, I'm very new to that was broken down by population, roughly?
Yes.
Are we like, how
You
many
bet.
people per district?
By statute, when the sponsors defined districts, each district had to be substantially equal in population, not in voters, but in population. So we used census numbers to make those divisions.
Do we know approximately what that number is?
Oh, I thought it was. I think when it broke out, I got the map. Let me see. Yeah, I cut and paste that. I think it's around 1,600 per district. 1,300. So those are 1,300 people. What's interesting is those could be babies and kids, not all registered voters. So the number of voters is going to be smaller than that.
Then a second question I had, when you went back, you were talking about the mayor and the council. Are those paid positions?
I did some research on that this afternoon. Huntsville, for example, is a town, and their pay is nominal, around $100 a month for the council members. The mayor slightly more. Half the council members give their money back. In cities of our size, it's all over the map. Let me show you. I looked up who are the cities that have our system. And there were some, the characterization was, it's all over the map. There were some smaller cities, Kaysville has our form, a few other small cities, Morgan I think has our form. It was maybe 12,000 a year, 13. The mayor slightly more. I think it depends on collectively the elected officials looking at each other and deciding how much work can we legitimately do? Do we want to be paid a nominal amount, or must we look at some other amount to cover how much work we are doing? And really, what's going to be right for the new city? I am not aware of an actual situation. I haven't researched budget, but, you know, I think there's room to be pretty Spartan in what pay, if any, the electeds will advocate. And I think that will be a good question for candidates.
And then just one follow-up on that. So then you were talking about, at the start of the city startup, the mayor and the council members may appoint themselves or somehow be the department heads or whatever. Are those positions paid?
Well, if they were filling operational positions, it will open that question of is any pay proper or appropriate. On the other hand, some may elect, they may decide, you know, for the startup, collectively, we all agree we're going to do this gratis or as volunteers for the first 6 months.
So it's a follow-up question on that. Since city council members could get or oversee or be the head of departments, how the city is trying to prevent the conflict of interest when there's a finance head council member proposing the budget for the next year and thinking that probably there's not going to be tax revenue enough to pay someone to be a head for the next 2 or 3 years. How we are going to make sure that the conflict of interest is not going, because they're going to be voting on the same.
Absolutely. You know, a review process can be set up to prevent an actual or occurrence of conflict of interest. But what we really need, and this was pointed out in the prior presentation, a very good ethics policy that the council people will adopt. One of the reasons that some of us got so personally involved in this campaign was that the ethics policy in Weber County is very weak. And in fact, it used to be the case, the planning commission had a strong policy. But when a dispute arose at the county level over a particular conflict, instead of raising their level of ethics policy to that higher level, they diluted the planning commission. And so that is a really strong motivation, I think, for the city to have a good ethics policy.
So are they planning already into writing and to?
Yes, that's some of the work that our volunteers are doing is finding, you know, state-of-the-art ethics and conflict of interest policies that we will recommend be adopted. And again, this will be a good question for the candidates. You know, where do you stand on this? What do you think of, what type of ethics policy would you support?
It could be included into the charter.
And also, for those of you who didn't attend the charter meeting previously, and this is the first time I sat through their presentation, one of the strongest reasons that is presented to a charter is to build into essentially the city constitution a really strong ethics in conflict of interest practice. And the speaker also pointed out how in Utah very often, you know, the colleague of someone with a conflict of interest ends up investigating that conflict, which just doesn't work very well.
So as a follow-up to that, if you guys are putting all of this stuff together to suggest that it's adopted, is this going to be on the website so that those of us who aren't running can look at it and say,
Oh, yeah.
okay, this is what we want to
Yeah.
question, are you going to do this or are you not?
Yes, you know, all of us who are working on this transition work are really working hard to maintain transparency. And the end product is going to be this startup manual. And I anticipate that that will be a public document. And we'll want people to see that, know it. We'll want to brief the candidates before the final election on that. And we're timing all this work so it's ready for the candidates to be briefed on.
And it's like you did the virtual city hall last night,
Uh-huh.
and you've got more of those scheduled, so anybody that wants to tune in can keep up abreast of what's
Oh,
going
yeah,
on.
do a great job. Was it? Yeah, you know what was great, if you called into that meeting last night, and it will be posted on the incorporation website, our folks simplified stuff that is pretty complex, Yeah, someone I talked to today said, it was clear you made it understandable, but there's a lot of work going on. Like, we have to think of things like, we are able to use Huntsville as our office, which is great. We can have storage downstairs. I inspected downstairs yesterday. It's unfinished basement, and I think, gee, we will need some shelves to put paperwork on. Or will we need computers, So we've got to think of, what do these people need who are elected? What will they need to really start working? And they'll be preparing to work after that election, after the November 7th election, but they've got a heck of a lot to get done with the county and with other, intergovernmental agreements that they will need to execute to get the city up and running.
Yeah, I think you're being very conservative, you're 10 to 20 hours a week. I think the first 6 months are gonna be much more than that.
Yeah, Janet reminded me of the 10 to 20 hours yesterday. That is when we were talking to Erda, which was the troubled city that was not prepared at all. And I think in past conversations with Mill Creek, which is up and running and actually has a lot of resources. Yeah, I think quite candidly, part of this is a labor of love. And it already is. Yeah, it's a labor of love. And yeah, it's taking on the mission of getting this city up and started on a healthy basis, and it won't be easy.
So when you said just now about where these folks are going to be working, where are they going to be working? I mean, we don't have a new Ogden Valley City Hall.
Here.
So are they renting it from?
We have an agreement,
Okay.
and that was actually approved and passed by the Huntsville City Council to be able to use these facilities. That is, at a minimum, using them for public meetings. But also, I frankly anticipate that we'll have some actual office work, office hours here, complementing or maybe piggybacking off of the Huntsville staff. So there are great opportunities for cooperation, and Huntsville has been absolutely cooperative, delightful, open door and sharing information with us.
And I would assume then our new city is either going to engage in an intergovernmental contract for leasing this space and leasing employees.
We will probably formalize it with an agreement, but a resolution was already passed allowing that by Huntsville. So, I just spoke with the mayor yesterday briefly and said, let's sit down and figure out how this is going to work. So, we're very fortunate. This is such a gorgeous facility. And frankly, there's space. Yeah. Even we could play pickleball during breaks, which I think is very clever. Any other questions before we break? Go ahead.
What happens if you're elected in one district and relocated to another?
Well, I think that would be a matter of ordinance that the new council would have to consider. Because there may be a requirement that you live in the district that you represent.
There's
Add that-
requirement to be elected.
Add that list to the new ordinances that we need to consider.
Yeah, you have to live in the district in order to be elected. But his question, I think, is after you're elected, say maybe a year or two in, it's a 4-year term, if they then move to a different area, what happens? Which is a valid
I
question.
think they would need to step down if they're not in that district, having represented district.
That could be something, if it's not addressed in the state law, we'd have to look, would we address it in the ordinance? And frankly, we're looking at other ordinances of other comparable cities to just piggyback again on their work and their prior thinking. Any other questions before we start breaking up into Did you have a question?
Sorry.
Fixing your hair?
Just.
Any other questions? If there are none, I suggest we break up into our two districts tonight. Michael is going to be with District 5 over here. And you can just make a circle